What is PTSD? PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, is a psychological disorder that is developed after exposure to or experiencing a traumatic event. To understand PTSD, we have to understand a little bit of how the brain functions during a traumatic event. When we experience or witness an actual or perceived life-threatening or dangerous event, our brain has a natural alarm system, also called the fight, flight, or freeze response, or our fear circuitry. The parts of our brain that are involved in the fight, flight, freeze response that are involved with PTSD are mostly within the limbic system, the amygdala, hippocampus, hypothalamus, and pituitary gland. The fight, flight, or freeze response also has effects on our prefrontal cortex. The prefrontal cortex is responsible for executive functions, weighing the pros and cons when we're trying to make a decision and then execute a behavior. Our brain goes into survival mode and the prefrontal cortex becomes effectively impaired or shut down during a traumatic experience, because our decision-making process is just too slow in the event of an immediate life-threatening situation. The amygdala sends an alarm signal to the hypothalamus that there is an immediate threat or danger. The hypothalamus sends a signal to the adrenal glands to release the hormone epinephrine, also known as adrenaline, into the bloodstream. The hypothalamus then signals the pituitary gland by releasing CRH. The pituitary gland triggers the release of ACTH that is sent to the adrenal glands, telling them to release cortisol. The adrenal glands send a signal to the brain to release neurotransmitters, opioids, for pain prevention, and oxytocin, which promotes feeling good. All of this is part of an autonomic process, called the HPA axis, that helps our brain determine if either fighting, fleeing the scene, or freezing will be our best chance of survival. The prefrontal cortex normally regulates amygdala function, inhibiting our fear circuitry when there's not an immediate threat. It is normal and natural for our brain's fear circuitry to become activated when an actual or perceived threat is presented. Our brain is designed to trigger many split-second changes in our body to defend or avoid danger. Everyone experiences this after a perceived threat and exhibits many of the symptoms of PTSD immediately after the situation. However, symptoms should subside or recover naturally over a short period of time following the event. It's when you continue to experience symptoms for extended periods of time that you may have post-traumatic stress disorder. Sometimes PTSD is described as your fear circuitry getting stuck in an on state. It's working and being triggered by cues related to the traumatic event, even when you are not in real danger, causing people to have disproportionate reactions to the threat that trauma-related stimuli propose. DSM-5 and diagnosis criteria for PTSD. The DSM-5 separates symptoms into 4 categories: intrusion, avoidance, negative cognition or mood changes, and arousal. A PTSD diagnosis requires having been exposed to an event that involved the actual or perceived threat of death, serious injury, or sexual violence, in one of the following ways: direct exposure, witnessing the trauma; indirect exposure, such as first responders, learning that a traumatic event happened to a close family member or friend. Symptoms of PTSD can include recurring/intrusive memories, recurring, distressing nightmares, flashbacks, emotional distress when exposed to triggers, physical reactions, or reactivity, or distress when exposed to internal or external triggers or cues related to a traumatic event. Criterion B, avoidance, avoiding trauma-related stimuli after the traumatic event, in one or more of the following ways: avoiding distressing memories, thoughts, or feelings, avoiding external reminders such as people, places, conversations, activities, objects, or situations. Criterion C, negative cognition or mood change, having 2 or more of the following symptoms of negative alterations in cognition, thoughts, feelings, behaviors, or mood, starting or worsening after the traumatic event. Also referred to as emotional numbing, unable to remember important details of the event, negative beliefs about oneself, others, or the world such as I am bad or no one can be trusted. Distorted cognitions about the cause lead to the victim blaming themselves or others for the event. Negative emotions include fear, horror, anger, guilt, or shame. Noticeably or significantly decrease interest or participation in activities. Persistent inability to experience positive emotions such as happiness, satisfaction, or love. Criterion D, arousal, having or showing 2 or more of the following noticeable changes in arousal and reactivity associated with the traumatic event: irritable behavior and angry outbursts expressed by verbal or physical aggression, reckless or self-destructive behavior, hypervigilance, exaggerated startle response, concentration problems, disturbances in sleep. A PTSD diagnosis also requires the following 3 criteria. Symptoms last longer than 1 month. The symptoms cause significant distress and dysfunction or impairment in social, work, or other important areas in your life. Symptoms are not the effects of a substance or another medical condition. There are 2 specifications of PTSD. 3. Dissociative. In addition to PTSD criteria, in response to the trauma, the individual experiences persistent symptoms of either of the following. A. Depersonalization is the experience of being an outside observer of the experience, watching like a dream. B. Derealization is the experience of unreality, distance, or distortion of the experience. This isn't real. 4. Delayed specification is that the full diagnostic criteria are not met until at least 6 months after the trauma, even though the onset of symptoms may occur immediately. Comorbidities and co-occurring disorders. PTSD can be comorbid with a variety of other psychological disorders including, but not limited to, major depressive disorder, alcohol dependence or abuse, drug dependence or abuse, personality disorders, general anxiety disorder, panic disorder, social phobia, and more.